Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guild House. This is a weekly podcast in which I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop, RPG and surrounding space. And it is a bit of a special episode. One, because I'm joined by Samuel Plothooks. Secondly, this is episode 100.
Woo!
I know, yeah. So what an absolute honor. Thank you so much for joining me on it.
Yeah, I when I was looking it up to actually see like the length that your episodes typically are, I was just like, just to refresh my memory and be able to actually give a time estimate to my family of whenever how long I was going to be gone. I was like, oh yeah, we're like right at episode 100. This is neat.
I kind of makes me feel like there should be like a podcast which is like an endurance thing where it just ends when the conversation dies and you just keep going. Like there's no timestamp. It's just like we're in hour 7. We've still got stuff to kind of talk about. But no, yeah, honestly, yeah, I always feel weird because was it? So you're running the kind of plot hooks podcast as well. I'm always like, I don't know. It feels nice to celebrate like round numbers, like 50, 100. But then it's always like, well, 52 is a year, and then 104 is 2. But so it's like, how do you kind of? I don't know how to celebrate right. So I've got
there's different things like I follow some Magic the Gathering podcasts, like and one of the big things in playing Magic the Gathering is you want to create card advantage, so you want to have 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s or what. And so like there's this particular podcast I follow called Limited Resources where like episode 341 or 441 or 541 are like their big episodes because it's the 5-for-1 episode or whatever. And it's just so it's just like whatever floats your boat, just celebrate whatever episode.
You know, yeah, and you know what, I want to celebrate this one. So it's a new year. We're starting the year and we're starting things off with a bang. And let's jump into it. So like I guess kind of for the people listening then, what are like some of the stuff that you've been getting up to behind the machinations of plot hooks?
yeah, it's nice having just a whole creative network kind of guys who I am as an individual. No, I'm the founder and director of Plot Hooks. I'm not the only person here, but I'm the primary person who does a lot of the work that you see over at Plot Hooks on all of our social medias and other things. We started out as just a podcast, but then branched out to kind of an entire creative network doing written content, podcast content, lots of stuff on our Patreon, different DMsGuild supplements, branching out to drive-through RPG supplements and other stuff like that, running our first Kickstarter right now, which is something that we'll get into, and just kind of branching out into an entire creative network, which is dedicated to collaborative storytelling. I joke sometimes that we're oftentimes a storytelling podcast or storytelling medium that is masquerading as a TTRPG space, because that's kind of the niche that we wanted to slot our content into whenever we founded it. Me and some of the other guys from my D&D group and now me and my family, my wife and other people involved with it. There's a lot of like just DM tips and amazing shows that do stuff like that. Amazing shows, actual plays, amazing interview shows like this one and Roll for Persuasion, and just amazing things to have on all sorts of creators. But in terms of actually resources to help just players and GMs alike tell the best stories that we can at our tables and just kind of learn together and have the best experiences that we can. There was not as much in that space. And so that's kind of the niche that we wanted to slot ourselves into. And yeah, just everything we do, which is in a lot of different realms, is just all around, the art of collaborative storytelling.
It's kind of like fascinating because like when you hear about particularly when people kind of begin to kind of work within kind of creating tabletop RPGs products, it's really fascinating kind of see where their starting point kind of bleeds through their kind of almost like creative process. And it kind of makes sense. Like, yeah, if you're doing like a podcast where you're like, oh, we want to put together, again, not to you probably get the plot hooks, as like a branching point of like, these storytelling kind of conceptual ideas. At some point you're like, hey, maybe we should, I don't know, write some of these down. Rather than, kind of transform from, a kind of audio format into kind of like a I guess like that, yeah, a written one. What was it in particular? So what was the kind of the first stepping stone for you?
Um, I, th- I think it was just essentially the decision to actually do it, because it had been something that had been on my mind for a while, and eventually it was just kind of something that we decided to dive into. And so actually over this is kind of our 2-year anniversary right now. It's over Christmas and holiday break in December leading up to the new year 2 years ago. We just kind of like made all of the resources and intros and all that sort of stuff to be able to just get started, recorded episodes and just kind of launched in. So it was just kind of a thing like, this is something that we wanted to do. You know, we wanted to delve into this collaborative storytelling space, you know, episodes like, rather than, you know, ways of, you know, fighting against a particular creature or whatever, things like different ways of introducing a villain into your story, you know, like different things of actually how we tell great stories. Again, almost like things that you would see if you were like looking at a course for writing a fantasy story or writing a horror story or whatever. Different tips in those veins is kind of what we just decided to just, you know, record and write down, and we've gone from there.
I must admit, so I think I kind of what I really like about that kind of like collaborative aspect, even like from like a product side of things, like once you have something published and written out there, the fact that people can kind of take those ideas and see them as like essentially seeds, where they kind of, and again, in the nicest sense of the time, they cut away the stuff that they don't need and they just like enhance it. They kind of turn it into their own. And just being able to kind of be like, oh, you know, that little seed that, you know, obviously it changed a lot as it grew, but that little seed, I could have helped with that. And it's kind of nice because again, it kind of builds and kind of improves from it.
Absolutely.
I guess kind of, so before we talk a little bit more about, I guess the, you know, the publishing kind of side of things, still on like the podcast fronts, what's been one of the, like your favorite conversations that you've had?
I think the best conversations that we've had is actually with my friend Dave. You know, we've had a lot of guests on the show and people that are perhaps on the face, you know, quote unquote, more famous, and we're exciting to talk to, people like B. Dave Walters or whatever. But like my friend Dave is an archaeologist. He's a literal archaeologist, spends time usually in Mexico on like archaeological digs every summer. And we have done episodes about building great ruins, building authentic ancient cultures, basically things that I would have never considered. It's like whenever you're building out an environment or a history for your players to interact with in some TTRPG, how do we do that and make it feel authentic? You know, how do we do that and include all the things that it will actually, you know, make sense? How long does it take for something to become a ruin? You know, and like all sorts of really interesting questions that delve into science, which is just something that I really enjoy anyway. That's just kind of the really nitty gritty stuff, which is fascinating, helps me out a lot. And I really enjoyed those kind of conversations. It's so fun.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely an element of like when you come to like any sort of like tabletop RPG, you always kind of, everyone is people, they just have things that they're nerdy about. Like I'm quite like I'm like, it's a case of like, I don't know, like I'm quite fond of that sort of like creating like characters, and that's kind of what I get. I always try and want to have this like elaborate backstory, and that's kind of what I, you know, nerd out about. But equally, like people who like in their day-to-day lives are, you know, like architects or, you know, historians or, you know, even like librarians and stuff like that, and they can kind of bring that like that wealth of knowledge kind of through the game. It's kind of interesting to kind of see how when it comes to like world building as a whole, the lens in which they look at it. And particularly from like from an architectural standpoint, like any kind of like tabletop RPGs, like there's so much you could do with like different like cultures, different kind of like there's so much. And I must admit, I haven't really considered that much, just because I can't build. Or, I can, I've drawn some maps, but I'm pretty sure, from an architectural standpoint, they're probably questionable. There's some, it's not up to standards.
Yeah, and even I had the privilege of DMing for actually Dave's first character, and he is for the very first character, as he's getting into it and kind of wanting to have something that is a little bit more comfortable for him. He builds something that's like himself. So what he ends up with is just a college of lore bard, and really works in history and archaeology into this character, and seeing that approach to character building was enlightening too, and we actually did an episode about that as well, in terms of, we called it building a different bard. But yeah, so those episodes are really fun for me. But
there is always that weird kind of interplay as well, though, because like when you as a character, even like if your character is like almost like a further embodiment of you, and there is always that gap of like me as a human being, I know a good amount about. I'm going to use the architectural example. My DM, on the other hand, may not know as much about architecture as I do, that I can maybe use to my benefit about certain elements during gameplay and stuff like that, which is it's fun. It always comes up, and it's like those moments where I think everyone's kind of had it. You're playing through a session, someone suggests something which is probably beyond the intended scope of the game, and everyone sits around going, I think we probably need to Google that and just work out can chickens fly? And then next minute, everyone comes away going, turns out they can, and then that's the kind of the awesome kind of cinematic moment. Awesome. Well then, okay then, and then so from the podcast then to the publishing side of things, how long ago did you kind of decide that, okay, well now let's publish something, let's throw something out on DriveThru or the DMsGuild?
It started out just on our Patreon, which was originally our patrons just got some extra podcast content, but we initially just started putting together just some random things. It started out as just essentially bits of lore from our homebrew world that we played in, and slowly that kind of branched out into just creating more written stuff that we decided to try publishing. And we started with a simple subclass that we put up on, it's called the Oath of Destiny, which we put up on the DMsGuild, just to get our feet wet and to make sure that we, figured out exactly how it worked. And then since then, it's just been, we just been working on stuff. I've run teams to publish, I think, 4 other ones since then, and we've got a 5th that is coming out to DriveThru, which is our first on DriveThru, coming out in a couple of days, and it'll already be out by the time this goes live. And obviously the Kickstarter that we're running, so it's just kind of been bing bang boom since.
so it definitely sounds like from the kind of the inception, like Plot Hooks as a company, or just as like I don't know what to kind of have that kind of collaborative aspect. And you kind of mentioned, so for a lot of these projects you've been bringing on like a good number of other people as well.
Yeah, we've definitely not just me. We've had a bunch of at least artists on everyone. There have been a couple of things that we've released that I've just been the one, some of the smaller things that I've just been the ones to write. But the first Disaster Hamsters had a team of 3 other writers plus myself producing that. For Villagers, that was a large project that had 9 or 10 staff members on that one, all the way up to our biggest is 17. So it's we've definitely not something that I could do myself. It's certainly collaborative is the best way of handling these things too, because you get to bounce ideas off of each other and just end up with the best product that you can.
Yeah, so basically, I guess starting as a king point, talking about villagers, which again is such an awesome name. The idea of villains as villagers.
Yeah.
I think what kind of I've worked in kind of similar projects where it's almost like the the breadth that, again, a bunch of different kind of authors kind of bring to the table, you end up with like some wacky, in the best of way, kind of concepts. Well, I guess, like, again, not to like, what was it? It's like 74 pages of villainy.
Yes.
Yeah. What were some of those standout ones for you?
There's a goodness gracious. There's one that me and Holly Wake did called their name is Metig Balzier, which is a non-binary dwarf which runs a bathhouse, and all these characters, as the name Villagers, intimates, are people that look completely normal, and you wouldn't bat an eye when you cross them in the marketplace. You would greet them, say hi. They're upstanding members of the community, but they have dark secrets hidden in their proverbial basement, or literal basement, as the case may be. And so this really popular bathhouse in the area that Metig runs is actually a front for a drug ring. The big thing that they have at this bathhouse is actually mud baths, which is sourced out of just dust, which essentially emanates out from a portal to the elemental plane of Earth, which is underneath the establishment.
Yeah.
But they also have figured out a way to refine this dust, not just into the glorious mud baths, but also refine it into a illicit drug called soot, which they then just essentially run a drug empire out of the basement of this particular bathhouse. There's a harbor master which sneaks trade routes and different shipping manifests to a pirate ring. There's a green dragon that disguises themselves as a member of the aristocracy because they enjoy gaining power without having to use their dragon force.
Yeah.
And so there's just all sorts of interesting ones. Those are some of the ones that stand out, but there's so many. There's 25 just completely unique and really interesting characters.
Because I think what's so kind of interesting, kind of fascinating about the concept as a whole is the fact that these are things that kind of make a world seem living. I mean, it's the fact that, like, you go to a world, there may be a throwaway point where the player's like, oh, we're filthy, we need to go to like a bathhouse. And the fact that the bathhouse as a whole has this whole kind of, under the table, like, back thing going on that the players can have, like, stumble into. It's that kind of like organic that makes the world feel more alive, that it's not just, a DM kind of puppeteering everything. It's like the fact that there's people going on with their own things that don't always, involve ending the world or, little things.
And we try to spread it out too. There's like it's a pretty wide range of CRs amongst the 25, from like several way down low on the 1 and 2s of the spectrum, all the way up to like 18s and stuff like that, so that no matter where you're at, you can have something which will be interesting and intriguing to the party to interact with.
Yeah, and then again, going through the kind of other stuff where you got, like, what was published on the things. There's also, it's just sentient. I don't know why I was unsure about my pronunciation of that for a second. I think Villagers has thrown me for a loop, that I just assumed there's a pun in there somewhere.
Yeah, didn't put any puns in that one.
Thank you for that. But no, in the same way, again, like, I feel like at least with items as well, I'm quite fond of creating, like, sentient items. I think it is just cool because it's it's a plot hook on a string. It's something that you can give to the characters. Sentient items don't have necessarily the same baggage as an NPC does. Just because at any point you can just pop them in like a bag of holding, and then you don't have to worry about it. But to have this kind of like this weapon that a player bonds with, and has a kind of, occasionally there's conflicting goals where players, they want powerful items, but if the item kind of has desires or intentions, then it's like, okay, well, how do we work this weird my relationship with the sword now? Was that generally, again, as like another kind of, I guess, storytelling device? Was it just like there's a lot of potential here?
Yeah, absolutely. It was that combined with again, our desire to push into niches which are a little bit less explored. And so of the 10 items in Sentient, only one of them is a literal weapon. They're like sentient objects of all descriptions that the players get to bond with and have interactions with. Some of them are better for other classes, and then some of them are just, you know, things that you can have. One of them is a sentient D6, which tries to get you to gamble, and gives you a lot of benefits if you win. But if you lose, eventually it can steal your soul. There's good ones too, because most of the time you end up with a sentient. The classic one is a sentient sword that's evil. You know, is like that's what I feel like. You know, a quarter of the things that we come up with as DMs to throw with our to throw at our players. And we do have a sentient halberd that is evil. That is. I mean,
you have to have at least one evil weapon. It's kind of
But yeah, it's like the D6. It's like an ocarina. There's a sentient keg. There's a sentient. Gosh, what are some of the other ones? There's a sentient pair of boots, sentient shield, and they all have their own backstories of how they became sentient. Some are enchanted. Some are literally bonded with the souls of a certain individual who maybe possess the object, and just different things to create a more unique storytelling opportunity than just a sentient weapon. But yeah, they really are fun to play with.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about, particularly like when it comes to like sentient objects, is always that kind of like balance between like how this it always feels like the idea of being trapped within an object for all eternity. It always has that thing of like how is the person dealing with their existence? You know, if are they perfectly happy being a keg? You know, maybe they're a little bit, you know, boisterous, where that's their ideal. Like they've worked their whole life towards this, or is have they had like one too many happy Mondays that are just like I'm not feeling.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. That'd be an interesting mechanic to develop. Is a way of freeing a particular sentient person and like embodying them into a familiar or even just another individual. That'd be a really interesting mechanic to just kind of throw in as a aside.
Because I guess it's always that part of as a player and stuff like that. There's obviously like the attachment on like a mechanical level to like, you know, a weapon, but then also that kind of idea of like you're helping, you know, this weapon serve like a grander purpose of like, I know I'm very powerful, I'm very dangerous as a sentient weapon and stuff like that. I need your help destroying me, because otherwise, you know, you may have me now, but one day I may fall into the wrong hands, and that's best avoided. But I guess what I kind of love about, again, both Villain just and kind of Sentient, it's that same thing of where it's kind of expanding on, I guess, or kind of it's expanding and subverting kind of tropes. It's necessarily, there's always kind of like, as you said, there's an evil halberd kind of paying homage to like, you know, the kind of stereotypical that everyone respects, but the kind of the wealth of the interesting kind of storytelling aspect are the ones where you go, okay, well, most people expect this. How can we kind of play around with it and stuff like that? And again, with a whole book of, you know, villagers you love to meet, and then turns out they're evil, or, you know, items that you think, oh, look at this, just a pair of shoes, I'll pop them on, and oh, the shoes are now talking to me.
So fun.
Yeah, it's I was say, is that generally like a kind of another kind of core aspect is that kind of almost subversion of tropes and kind of, again, working in design voids, I guess.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big things that we try to do. You know, I oftentimes, just my creative process, people ask a lot of times, like, what's your creative process, or whatever. And my creative process is very simple. I just come up with an idea that just sticks in my head, and then I just start attaching things to that idea until I end up with some Frankenstein's monster of a random idea, but those things that I keep sticking to the ideas go into like those dead spaces of content. And so like with disaster hamsters, you're just like I wonder what it would be like if we would play a hamster, and then it's just like you just stick all these things on and like, oh man, how do they become sentient? Stick this thing on here, and so and just end up creating this massive amalgamation of something which is just a cohesive whole somehow at the end of it, by just pure iteration.
So funny enough, you've got ahead of me on two fronts. One, talking about like where your kind of ideas come from, and second, I was saving Disaster Hamsters and most notably Disaster Hamsters 2s to kind of chat a little bit about now. But like, was it literally just like the idea of like, well, I mean, someone's out there is probably going to want to play as a hamster for like a one shot kind of thing. Yeah,
that literally was it. It literally, I can tell you, it's even almost a little bit dumber than that, because it's trying to come up with a title for this concept and thinking about what would make a good title, and literally coming up with the idea that disaster and hamster rhyme, and just like, then okay, disaster hamsters. All right, let's roll with this idea, and just rolling almost from the concept and the title itself onward. And yeah, so it really is just an amalgamation of nonsense, and then editing, which is important to become something that is good and cohesive and still crazy, but hilarious and fun at the same time.
So was that literally the kind of like inception then? Did Disaster Hamster, did it start as like a one shot and then kind of grew a little bit to kind of, I think it's like 3 to 4 sessions?
It did start off, and initially was the original Disaster Hamsters. The idea was to create a one shot, but we ended up creating just a lot of content.
Yeah,
as we were just going through, me and Ken Hart, Star Shinobi, and Holly Wake, which were the 3 other writers that were on the project with me. We created something which was just a lot of stuff, and lots more potential for different avenues for you to play with. So we added a bunch of content in there where you can actually play it over the course of about 3 to 4 sessions. Or you could just play through just almost like a pared down version. But there's even like an additional chapter in the appendix where you can literally just add like another session almost on top of it, with them trying to go through a maze. And that gives you a little bit of extra lore too about why this person, Jerry Heliot, the main villain in the story, why they're actually doing this in the first place. It just kept kind of growing and created an alternate ending so that where you can have the players get their bodies back, and so they're not just, the original idea was they're just sentient hamsters, but then we created this alternate version where you could actually have your real PCs dropped into the bodies of hamsters for a session, go through the adventure, get their bodies back, fight the bad guy, and then it's just something you could drop into your normal campaign. Yeah. And so we just kept chopping things on this original idea until we ended up with a giant product that's
definitely sometimes that's like the joy of like designing or creating anything is it almost feels like the sticky ideas, like the idea of like you have this center idea which you just like things just keep connecting to it, and then it grows. It's like, was it like I'm forgetting, I'm kicking myself because I grew up in the Katamari Damacy. Like the little sticky ball that rolls around and just gets bigger and bigger until next thing you know, you're rolling up, entire houses. And I know I must admit, there is always that appeal of like when you're kind of designing adventures, it is that kind of thing of like, okay, well, how do we make it as accessible for as many people as possible? And I guess not everyone may sit down thinking, I'd like to play a hamster today. It's also the case of like, oh no, your characters are being turned into hamsters whether you like it or not. We're doing this. this is kind of coming along for the journey. So then I guess the important question is what were some of the things that you hit perfectly with Disaster Hamsters that kind of made you think, We kind of need a sequel. There's more stick, more to this ball that we need to kind of roll out.
I think the biggest thing that made us want to make a sequel was just the response that we got to it. There is a downside to the whole idea of playing into niches which aren't as explored. Mm-hmm. And that is there's oftentimes a reason why it isn't as explored, is because it's just simply something that's just less popular. Sometimes you might find a really cool hotspot where it's something that is just a new idea that people haven't considered. But a lot of times it's just, this is just something that's not quite as popular, like for instance, with sentient items, a sentient weapon does have more general appeal than a sentient D6. And so you create something that's unique and interesting, but there is, a more niche audience for it. Yeah. But with Disaster Hamsters, we just found that we really just hit on something that was really intriguing. It is by far our best selling product that we've ever had, but it's just also just the most well received by the people that have it. It's great for all ages because it could really be easily played as just something that's really goofy and kid friendly, or it can be played really epically where you're on this epic adventure. There's still the inherent silliness of the fact that you're playing as hamsters, but you can have on epic adventures as these tiny rodents, and you're faced with different challenges where all of a sudden it's actually difficult to get off of a table that you're stuck on as a hamster, and it's like it's so you as even a 3.5 style really mechanical min-max type challenge that a person might want, you even have that to a certain degree. So yeah, we found that we just kind of hit on one of those things which is just an unexplored like
that kind of sweet spot.
Yeah, exactly. And so we just, it was really enjoyable for us to make. And so we just took that concept, which was that really insulated adventure, and we have just blown it sky high into an entire book that we're trying to produce.
So I guess so if the first book is a contained adventure or like series kind of adventures to kind of play, what is kind of the Disaster Hamsters 2? Is it still that kind of adventure side of things, or is it kind of expanding out to be like there's a little bit of everything?
Yeah, it is. It's expanding out to a little bit of everything. The book has three main parts. One is much more detailed and complete hamster mechanics. There's a lot of updates to the mechanics in the first edition of Disaster Hamsters, but what we're doing is we're refining that and creating that. I'm working a lot with Willie Abil, which is they're a excellent game designer, and so we're working to create really intricate mechanics which will allow you to play as basically any small mammal that you want to play as within the confines of 5th edition. And then we have in the second portion, we have an entire campaign setting, which is unlike in the first Disaster Hamsters, where you are trying to escape the lab of this bad guy, and you're playing very much in a human space as a hamster size.
Yeah.
This entire 100 mile diameter nature preserve in Disaster Hamsters is entirely populated by sentient animals and societies built by sentient animals. So this is you being plopped down as a hamster in the middle of a town of hedgehogs, or in a squirrel tree city, or basically anything that you can imagine from like a cat size down.
Yeah,
there is something in this campaign setting which is dealing with that kind of animal, and so that it's just an entire campaign setting for you to play in as an animal.
It's nice because, as I say, it feels almost like that. Like the first, just the initial disaster hamster is almost like a series of hamsters being like teleported to a different plane of existence where they are now the human successor. And now, when at the end of the adventure, when they can return home, this the sanctuary, this kind of world of animals is actually where they're meant to be, and they're just like, that was a weird experience. Glad we're now back with normal sized things. I'm sorry, I was gonna say, and the third part of the book.
The third part is the adventure. We do have an adventure in this as well. It is a longer adventure. It's not just a one shot. It actually will take you from levels 1 to 3 in 5th edition. That is being written by Kat Kruger, Colette Kwok, and Ken Hart from the first Disaster Hamsters. And so that basically works you through many different aspects of the sanctuary with the ultimate goal of kind of defeating the overlord of the sanctuary, which is this kitty named Snuggles that's been spliced with red dragon DNA. Nice. It's the kitten that you see on the cover of Disaster Hamsters 2, kind of looming behind the hamsters. There is kind of your ultimate big bad in the Hamsterverse.
I think it makes sense that some sort of feline is the natural villain to hamsters as a whole. No, I was gonna say, I kind of want to adding to a point you kind of mentioned earlier about I guess the kind of a comical aspect to kind of Disaster Hamsters, which I do love, and I think that you can get a good amount of mileage out of almost the kind of leaning into the comedy side, or the kind of almost over the top situations, because 9 times out of 10 the comedy kind of falls to the table, and they can play it, they can take it, and their table may take it entirely deadpan, which in its own sense is hilarious. But then there's equally going to be groups who they're going to lean into it hard, and that's kind of perfect balance. And I think a lot of people, obviously it depends on kind of what people want from experience, but I think some people are sometimes hesitant to be like, oh, I don't want I don't want people to think that it's my adventure's a joke. But sometimes you can make it a joke in the kind of the best of ways. And I know that was
one of our play testers actually created what I think is my favorite character that I have seen yet, Disaster Hamsters, which is a warlock hamster named his name was not Pinky, but literally the character was Pinky, and his patron that he could hear in his head was the Brain. So he was literally playing Pinky and the Brain as a hamster through this hamster adventure. It was hilarious.
That's such a unique concept. Honestly, I can't imagine clearly Pinky's going to be the unfortunate being walking around, and the Brain will be some patron bestowing these eldritch powers. So then I guess as well, so in kind of I love the pairing of a setting that also kind of has the tie-in adventures to kind of explore those kind of locations, because sometimes I do find with typical kind of gazetteers or those kind of products or setting guides, there's always that balance of giving enough detail and then trying to imagine as a DM of okay, well, how do I put an adventure in this location? And obviously not every product can have both, but it's kind of great that Disaster Hamsters does. I kind of turning that into a question, because that was just a statement. What are some of the things in Disaster Hamster 2 that you're quite excited about, or quite have kind of refined over from the first iteration to the second?
I'm really looking forward to just building lots of different animals. In the first one, there was a few other NPCs. There was most notably there was a bunny, a rattlesnake, a phoenix, and a couple of displacer kittens, which were kind of the main features in Disaster Hamsters 1. Since we're doing a non-DMsGuild release, displacer cats are actually one of D&D's trademarked entities. They're one of their original creatures, like beholders. So they're there. That's one of the reasons why in the main big bad in Disaster Hamsters 2 is a dragon based cat, because we can't use displacer kitties in our OGL product, but I'm looking forward to just being able to delve into all sorts of different animal societies and creating all these different things, like, oh, okay, what animal is here in this mining area? There's the setting map, which was done by Chloe Boland, an absolutely amazingly detailed setting map. I kind of just told her to just kind of go wild and gave her parameters for what was where mainly, but then just put stuff places. And so you just get the map back and you just kind of look and like, okay, there's a mine cart coming out of this mountain here. Okay, what creatures are here in that I can develop, which are building a mining operation?
Yeah.
What creatures are over here in this abandoned apiary? And you just build all sorts of really interesting places for you to explore, and that's just what I'm looking forward to most, is just being able to world build with this. Haven't gotten a ton into it yet, the actual world building part of it. That's what I'm just looking forward to most.
No, it's the sweet point of like collaboration, whether it's like reading someone else's draft or receiving kind of like the art back, how it kind of, again, it just feeds into the creativity of like, this, within the parameters, you got the art back. And that in itself, you now have more ideas. You have more things are now getting stuck to this ball to kind of continue expanding, and only through the act of getting the art back or reading the draft back that you did have this like again additional spark. Kind of it keeps things kind of iterative.
One of our staff members, partners came up with a random idea, which I don't know if it'll fly copyright rights, but wants us to create a raccoon named Trash Pandacoot. Which I don't know if we can do that or not, but that would be hilarious if we could do that. And it's just like, oh, now this idea, okay, and now he must live in an abandoned house with a bunch of other like raccoon gang members, and you're just like, let's create a whole lore about Trash Pandacoot.
I mean, I think you can get like the infamous figure known as the Trash Panda will probably get you quite far. I don't know how I think it's Naughty Dog. Did they do Crash Bandicoot? Either way,
I'm not sure which one initially does it.
I'm not sure how Iron Fisted they are. Like, no, there will be no coots allowed. But no, I guess to kind of to take a kind of step back then, because earlier you kind of mentioned that a good kind of part of your creative process is again that expanding sticky ball. You kind of sticking more kind of ideas on it. As you're kind of going through the creative process then, would you say you have like a favorite and like least favorite aspect?
I guess I would say my favorite part is towards the beginning and my least favorite part is towards the end.
Yes, the classic answer.
Because I love the brainstorming. I love being creative. I love coming up with the ideas and writing them all down. Ultimately, once a product is done and I'm into the nitty gritty of layout, because I tend to do my own layout, that's my least favorite part. It's important and necessary. And especially when you're trying to do something accessible too, we try to do accessible layouts as well. But all of the layout work does tend to get a bit tedious because you're like, we already created all this and I just want everybody to be able to see it. But in order to actually get it out there, we have to actually make it presentable and understandable in a certain way. And so you're just sitting there in front of InDesign with your eyes fluttering shut, for hours on end until you could get something actually out there for everyone to enjoy.
I think that there's like an interesting phenomena where like, if you're like a writer and any other like aspect of the project, when you are finished with your draft, your brain is like, I'm done. I've done the thing, and then you have to take into account the fact that editing needs to happen, layout needs to happen, all these other steps need to happen. But it is hard to fight over that. I'm done. Like the words are there. Nothing needs to change. This is done. but yeah, no, and especially sometimes, you know, the ongoing battle with layout. Sometimes, you know, everything looks fine within, you know, your Google Doc or your Word document, and then you have to now squeeze it into, like, you know, a particularly old pair of jeans. That sometimes it's like, oh no, this entire section needs to go on a new page. Oh, now we need to find 3.5 quarter like piece of art. Never gets old. But maybe that's just, I don't know if you feel the same, or if that's just me lamenting
Yeah, no, yeah, it's you know, you as creators, what we love to do, because it's in the name, is creating. We love being creative. We love being imaginative. And for some people, their best use of imagination is putting something together, almost like they're, you know, putting something together on a page and layout or whatever, or editing with the written words. And it's like that's their art piece. For a lot of creators, you know, the bulk of our stuff is the writing or the actual physically drawing of the art. Putting it all together into its finished package is something that is not as interesting to us as actually creating the thing itself. And so, yeah, once we are past that point, we're like, I just want to get to the, you know, part where I get to share this with people, not the part where I have to sit here and, you know, figure out how to change the wording of this sentence so that the paragraph doesn't bump off to the next page. And you're just like, sitting falling asleep at 10 o'clock at night.
And then what then? Okay, well, I to get away from the woes of layout, as you know, as and when they occur, across everything that you've kind of done, then I'm curious then if there is like a particular design choice that you've made that you can kind of point back to and be like, yeah, I'm pretty proud of what I did there.
Yeah, I can't take credit for it because it wasn't just me. But when we were working on Disaster Hamsters, you know, we mentioned the fact that one of the big things in Disaster Hamsters was displacer kittens. And when we were trying to come up with some sort of like big bad, so to speak, something that not only acts as an obstacle, but also acts as a pressure point so that the hamsters know that they have to escape. Because, you know, when you're talking about a one shot, they have to have actual emphasis to escape this lab. Because otherwise you're sticking the players in the middle of a lab with 1,000 shiny buttons and expecting them to just try to escape on their own without trying to push all the buttons first. And so you know, when we were trying to come up with something, just the idea of a kitten version of the ferocious and very popular character of a displacer beast is hilarious and was beloved by all of us and has been beloved by everybody else. That is coming up with that idea. The four of us that we were writing that is my favorite thing that we've ever done. It's just so great.
There's always like what you come across those ideas where if they're kind of suggested in like a Discord or like an instant messaging group or like on a video call where everyone goes, yo, and the chat becomes alive when everyone goes, that's amazing, that's such a good idea. And you just know you're into something there when you kind of get I think everyone is a creative regardless of where you are. You live for those kind of reactions of like the chat, like, oh, I've got 30 notifications since my last one, what happened?
Absolutely.
And well, then I guess to kind of turn that last question on its head, then is there like a particular lesson then that you've kind of learned through, you know, creating everything that, you know, you would go back, time machine permitting, and just like, hey Samuel, you should think about this.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson that I've learned, it comes from being part of a bigger and bigger teams. The whole idea of collaboration obviously has been core to us from the very beginning, but when it comes to actually creating a lot of the stuff that we did, a lot of it was insular at first. You know, even whenever we did like a couple of random things together, like it was, you know, like me, for instance, drafting a podcast script for me and the person who was going to be on the episode with me, and the whole idea of collaboration and really leaning into allowing other people to have space to work within even ideas that I or someone else may have, that is the thing that I wish I would have leaned into earlier. And it's something that I'm still working on leaning into now. It's easy to, take something, maybe an idea that you've had as a creator and not want to trust anybody to run with that idea. But it is so freeing and also so helpful to have somebody else's take on what you're doing, even with something like maps. Like I could sit down and give, like with the Disaster Hamsters 2 setting map, I could sit down and come up with, what I wanted the world to be and type up, a 3-page document on what went where and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But if you just give like the basic overview of what is where, like this biome is here, this biome is here, this city is there, the city is there, the rest, go for it. And just taking even from the artistic liberties of the artist and then working backwards from that. And you're like, all of a sudden your world is so much more rich for letting more people play in that space. And just that whole idea is something which I think is really important to creating a balanced and good and diverse supplement and product in general.
Yeah, no, 100%. Because I think as kind of ideas grow, it becomes, particularly with, again, like more complicated projects like setting guides and stuff like that almost like interweaving of ideas and concepts. Because I think it is easy, like in some like kind of collaboration, sometimes it can almost like feel like, oh, you have your section and then I'll have my section, and then someone will staple the 2 sections together, and then that's kind of it. But those experiences, like you kind of have that kind of balanced trust of like, okay, well, these are the directions I'm going. What kind of directions are you going? And you have that kind of there's moments where you're bouncing off each other. It's the idea of like, oh, I've got this, and that could kind of time with your thing, and then you're like, oh, that's great, I've got this thing, and then it kind of all kind of ties together, and you do kind of mention that kind of like that diverse range of voices, and that kind of bleeds through into the product, and you kind of see this kind of it doesn't feel like, was it like a Frankenstein monster kind of thing. It feels like it feels like it was whole, complete the whole time. But yeah, no, I'm definitely with you on that one. And I'm curious then, are there like, how have you found kind of, I guess, stepping into like almost like a project management role alongside being like a writer?
Yeah. I think it's definitely something that I've had to adjust and learn in. It's not something which I've done before in the creative space. I've been, managers or team leaders at various jobs in the past, but never in a creative space. And it's very different when you're talking about a creative space, especially because we all have our different creative processes. When you're talking about, how you best, load something or, spray something, or it's some random job that you might have, there oftentimes is a optimal way of handling something, or one of a few different options of ways of handling something. When it comes to being creative, I mean, anything and everything goes. I mean, you can just be as creative as you want. So being able to go through that process is something that is definitely an ongoing thing that I'm learning. But I think the key that I've learned is just, become a little bit more hands-off. And allowing people to just create and work it all into a cohesive whole is not really that different than throwing a bunch of ideas into that slime ball, creating everything, and then me working it into a cohesive whole myself, because it all still has to be a cohesive whole in general. As you mentioned, I don't leave things looking like they're, giant things. Put all these things on, of course, and then, chisel away at it until it's a sculpture, so to speak. And there's not really any different from doing that by working with and managing, a bunch of different people doing their own creative things and working it into a cohesive whole all together versus then just doing it myself. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I've just kind of learned to try to do it as best I can in kind of the same way, just dealing with lots of other people at the same time.
I guess it is a case of like, again, some of the best, again, you learn by doing. It's kind of, you kind of have to kind of immerse yourself in the thick of it to kind of truly, develop those skills, and each project in its own way is a lesson, and that's how you kind of, you build up your repertoire and, your toolbox builds, and things kind of grow.
Never stop learning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's actually kind of like a nice segue of like thinking about, project management and kind of collaborating with like a lot of people. Because obviously looking to kind of the greater community as a whole, would you say there are kind of like some people within like the tabletop RPG industry who kind of stand out as kind of like, I guess, points of inspiration?
Yeah. One person I point to is Ashley Warren, who is the founder of the Storytelling Collective, which she kind of heads up essentially a big a bunch of training courses for people wanting to write or publish adventures and stuff like that. But she really focuses, like, I believe she's, got like English degrees and stuff like that. She is very much coming at it, in the same way that we tried to. She has this background in storytelling, in writing and stuff like this, and is taking this to the TTRPG space rather than just saying, oh, I really love Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons or Vampire the Masquerade, and I'm just going to create something for that. It's actually taking that storytelling first aspect and then applying it to TTRPGs, and so that's been she's been a real inspiration for us. There's also just plenty of other creators that have come alongside us, people like Jess and Keith Pinley at Underground Oracle Publishing. Justice Arman is a great writer that I've enjoyed following. There's so many talented.
Oh yeah, no, like that. I always feel cool about this question because this is a case of like, oh no, I'm gonna leave someone out, or like, but no, 100% with you. Yeah, like you kind of mentioned like a bunch of really kind of like charming beacons of the community as a whole, and I've had the kind of pleasure to kind of speak to a bunch of people who have followed through on the RPG, the adventure writing workshop. And you can kind of see the impact that going through that, and the fact that Ashley Warren and the Storytelling Collective have kind of facilitated future generations. I don't know, it feels weird because like obviously like it makes it sound like they're children, but they're not. But it's like, I mean, it's new people coming into the hobby, with a fresh kind of story first perspective that can kind of it's probably more versatile than coming at it from like a system specific standpoint, to be able to take these kind of rules and just apply them anywhere, and just like, oh, for this time you've applied it to Pathfinder, but maybe you can try the Alien system or any other kind of open system that there is. Oh wow. Well, hot damn. I know that question always gives me the warm fuzzies. It's just generally nice. But I was going to say, looking at the time, Samuel, we've done it.
An hour. Rambled for an hour.
We've like I said, we were worried we weren't going to make it before the podcast, but lo and behold. I think, what was it before we mentioned that we both have kind of like podcast rust coming out back of the holidays, but we've both still got it. We've got it in our system. But again, I don't want to leave before hearing some, again, obviously we've had a good chunk about Disaster Hamsters too, but on top of that, what are like some of the stuff that you're currently working on, and arguably more importantly, where can people stay up to date with your work, and ideally back Disaster Hamsters 2.
Yeah, well, Disaster Hamsters 2, the Kickstarter launched on January 4th. It will run until February 3rd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the US. So we've got 30 days to raise a decent amount of money. We're trying to raise $22,250, which is just, it sounds like a lot, but when we have a team of 17 people on this particular project, and we're expecting this thing to be like 100,000 words, and obviously tons of art to go with this book, which is going to be like 150 to 200 pages. You're talking about something that is massive, and in order to pay everybody that is what we need to raise. So yeah, we just hit 10% funded after the first 24 hours.
Wow.
So we're on our way, but still a long way to go. And hopefully we'll get there. You can check it out. Just search Disaster Hamsters 2 and it'll come up. You can find all of our updates and stuff on all our social medias, where you can just find us at Plot Hooks. And that's pretty much all we're doing at the moment.
I can imagine like a Kickstarter of this size and scale. It probably takes up like a good chunk of your time.
Yeah,
just a little bit.
We're still doing a bunch of our standard Patreon content, but even that has been scaled back a little bit this month. It is Kaiju month. Oddly enough, that was the theme that our patrons voted for, kind of contrasting with the tininess of hamsters. I have to both create for hamsters and for giant monsters. So
I think you can save yourself some time. Just take a hamster and scale it up. Just make it really big and done. There you go.
Hamster. There you go.
That's like 1 week sorted or 1 day sorted. Don't look at the rest. Honestly, Samuel, thank you so much for taking some time to sit and have this. Sit and have the chat. It's that weird thing of like, I don't want to flex on, but standing desk. If it was today to stand and chat, gives it a more of like a we're meeting outside a coffee shop's vibe. But yeah, sorry. What was I saying? Thank you so much. Before I get distracted by my own tangents. Other than that, I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. I may have an adventure out right now called The Tome of Silence. I don't know yet. So by the time this podcast, it will either be out or will soon be out. And this is just like the announcement spoiler thing. So if there is that, take a look. It'll be in the description somewhere. You have to probably click through the Disaster Hamster 2 Kickstarter link first. So just click that first. And then you can check out all that kind of stuff. And then after you're done, you can come back to the video, finish out, hear me ramble and scroll down and check out my stuff. That all aside, it is time for my favorite and last question, which is, Samuel, how do you end a podcast?
Do you want the long-winded answer or the short answer?
I'll be honest, like we're looking at the time. It's entirely up to you. How long do you got?
Well, typically speaking, whenever we end our podcast, we just end by doing what you just did, saying announcements and then saying, we will see you again next time on the Plot Hooks podcast. But after we hit the end record button, we then hit the re-record button approximately 1 second later and play a game called Oofloof, which we ended up releasing separately, but we record it right after. Oofloof stands for overrated, underrated, favorite, least favorite. And we pick a random topic and we just go through and banter on about like our Oofloof pizza toppings. What's your overrated pizza topping? What's your underrated pizza topping? What's your favorite? What's your least favorite? And we just go through and that is how we always end everything with our podcast guests. And we ended up releasing that separately, like on our Patreon or whatever. But that is how we end our recording sessions with our guests.
You know what? I'm gonna listen. That's my favorite thing about talking to other podcast hosts is the fact that for this question I get to steal their ending. And I think let's end this with an Oofloof.
Oofloof.
Let's Oofloof about podcasts. So what is it? So favorite things? Do you want me to go through and do mine, and then I'll let you end on yours?
Go ahead. Yeah, overrated, underrated, favorite, least favorite. Oofloof. Okay.
Podcast. What is overrated about podcasting? That is a good question. Maybe a standing desk. I'm going to go back to like I'm moving around a lot, but I don't think it's good for me. My legs ache a little bit. What is underrated about it? Geez, I'm going to be cheesy. I'm going to say my podcast is underrated. Is that allowed?
Oh, that's perfectly allowed. Absolutely.
Favorite part, hands down, is just getting to chat to cool people. It's I get to do it. It's why I started the podcast. And the least favorite part, I'm going to say it's editing. It's cutting the thing down.
I think that's gonna be my least favorite as well.
No, dude, and then I'll pass it over to you, and then I'll let you close out the podcast.
Sure, yeah. Overrated. is microphones. Everyone thinks you need to get the fanciest microphone, and there is differences within microphones, most certainly, but you get a good pop filter like the basic one that you have now, which actually I don't actually have hooked up at the moment, but I actually
I think like everyone here. I think we literally have the same pop filter. It's easy to identify it. Yeah.
So if as long as you have something where you're not going to be making everyone jump on your P's and T's, and just a basic microphone, you can do it. The most important thing to do if you're starting a podcast is just doing it, regardless of the quality of your microphone. And so overrated is people talk way too much about microphones when you're talking about a podcast. Underrated is being able to meet new people. I know you mentioned as far as talking to a lot of people is why you get into it. For me, I was less trying to meet new people and more just trying to do something really cool. And meeting new people and interacting with a really interesting and fun community is just something that I have really enjoyed. As far as favorite is being able to make things and share things. I know that's rather vague, but just the concept of being able to have, in this day and age, the ability to sit in front of a computer, type something or say something, and being able to share it and have other people enjoy it is just really enjoyable to me. And least favorite is editing. Yes, absolutely. Especially if you're like editing like something massive where you like have like a round table or something, and you've got like 5 audio tracks, and somebody's audio drops out, and so all of a sudden their Audacity file is down a little bit, and you've got to resync everything. Oh, nightmare. Yeah.
It's kind of why you hope like during the podcast people just naturally clap, like every so often they have like a synchronized clap for no reason. No one's mentioned it, they just clap. Well, honestly, I like that, a little podcast in a podcast.
Sure, absolutely.
And thank you for listening, and we'll just let it fade.
Absolutely. Bye.
Two-handed wave. That's a new one for me. What I will do is I will hit